8th Planning and Transportation Commission meeting. We don't have a secretary, so I'll just quickly call roll. Commissioner Walfogel? Present. Commissioner Suma? Present. Commissioner Templeton, excuse me?
Present.
Commissioner Rupavar?
Present.
Commissioner Lowing?
Present.
Commissioner Alchek is present, and Chair Riggs is not present. Okay, I don't have any oral communication cards, but if you're here to speak on any of the items, just hand the card to Director Late if you have one. Are there any agenda changes, additions, or deletions, Director Late? No, okay, and then do you want to do the director's report quickly?
Yeah, I actually don't have much to report. There hasn't been a lot of planning-related activity in front of the City Council since our last meeting, but we had passed out, and maybe some of you had a chance to review this online already. On Monday, the City Council is going to discuss an evaluation of the residential permit parking program, and maybe toward the end of our agenda, and other sort of, announcements or future items, we may want to have a discussion about a comment in here about the Planning Commission's role in possibly its review of the program. So we don't have to talk about it now, and we probably can't have much of a conversation later, but I think it's worth letting the Planning Commission have a dialogue.
This is the staff
That's
report.
correct, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the main thing to report this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I am going to kick us off here with our study session. I am going to invite Evan Golden to approach. I'll give you a quick intro. It's unfortunate that Chair Riggs isn't here today, because as our chair and as our sort of transportation in-house expert, I think he would have been excited to introduce this study topic. But really quickly, for those members of the public, this study session came about as an effort by our chair, Commissioner Riggs, and myself, working to invite individuals to participate in a discussion with the commissioners, basically to give both the community, our staff, and our commission more exposure to things that are happening in sort of the planning environment that we might want to know about or understand and somehow incorporate into our review of other items that come to us by way of application. Tonight's topic, I think, is one close to Chair Riggs' heart, but our goal is to include or incorporate opportunities to get more exposure to topics that sort of range everything from environmental impact and housing needs and transportation solutions, as well as parking innovations like the one that we might hear about today. Okay, so with that, Evan Golden is going to have, what I'd like to do is sort of, the idea here was to have sort of a half an hour to have you present a little bit about this area of expertise you have, and then I imagine that this can be an informal sort of question and answer process. I will use the light ups to figure out who will go first, but because we only have half an hour, what I'll try to do is give people like somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes to ask questions so that everybody can ask, and if you don't want to ask a question, just let me know. Okay, does that work? Do you have a presentation? Awesome. The floor is yours.
Great, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here. And let me just full screen this. Sorry, it's cut off a little bit. Oh, there we go. Great. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight, and I do promise to keep this short. I have my own Menlo Park Complete Streets Commission meeting at 7, so you won't be hearing from me for too long. But very excited to be here to talk about what I'm doing today, because what I'm doing today really started here from Palo Alto. Grew up here, went to Palo. One of my first summer jobs after high school was actually working for the Public Works Department here in this building, well, actually not in this building, but over on Bayshore, doing the initial data study for what is now the residential permit parking program in downtown Palo Alto. Literally waking up at 4 in the morning, driving down the street, counting every single car on every single block and figuring out what the impact was going to be of a residential permit parking program. So you could say my interest in parking really started here and has yet to end, hopefully never will. Just a little bit of background, I joined Lyft, what was then Zimride, in 2012, was the first product manager there, stayed there for about 3.5 years, designing the app, figuring out how the service worked, how we scale. So I've spent a lot of time working in transportation and building technology to improve mobility and how people get places. More recently left there and ran product management at a company called Chariot that you may be familiar with. It was an on-demand shuttle service that had a number of routes around the Bay Area. Unfortunately was shuttered about a month and a half ago, 2 years after we were acquired by Ford. But have spent a lot of time thinking about this, and a lot of my interest really came down to parking. And this slide is about my interest, but also about what I know you guys do every time you meet. Every new development that's proposed, parking is a hot topic, to say the least. And many developments come down to parking. I think the next couple slides will likely recap things you already know, but very often the developments you guys review and adapt and work with developers in the community on, parking is one of the big sources of frustration. I am well aware of that, and we'll get into kind of how we're helping that, but I wanted to kind of frame the issue a little bit. Most of, I watch planning commissions here, elsewhere, everywhere, and generally, developers want lower parking requirements. That helps their developments pencil out and allows them to, make a development more profitable and ensure that they can actually build it. But in many cases, neighbors want the opposite. Neighbors want more on-site parking. They want to minimize the overflow onto their streets and ensure that that new apartment building down the street isn't going to make it harder when their friends and family and loved ones come to visit their home. So as a result, a lot of projects either, I'm sure the projects you see either don't pencil out or end up with too much parking. This was talked about a lot last year at City Council, but the City of Palo Alto paid for a consultant to come and do an analysis on parking utilization at a number of apartment buildings around town. They did a study of these 9 apartment complexes that are all already constructed. Some of them have been around for quite a while. And tried to understand what the parking utilization actually looks like. They hear a lot from neighbors, and neighbors come to speak at these meetings and say this new development really needs more parking, and the city wanted to find out, well, what's happened with these developments. So, and this may be rehashing data if you guys attended the city council meetings, and apologies if it came before planning, I couldn't recall. But in many cases, we are overparked at these developments. That's not a good outcome. That means that the developer spent too much money building parking, and rents are likely higher as a result. And it means that we have, kind of missed the opportunity to get parking right. And these developments cross a number of different types. The first 3 you see are all affordable. The mid 3 are market rate, and the last 3 are focused on seniors. So the parking rates vary wildly, but this was a study that the consultant did at peak hours. So typically weekday, late evening. Even at the peak hour, there was extra parking capacity. So what I've started to look at is what we can do with that. And in addition, a lot of these developments, and some of the ones they looked at were not necessarily in commercial areas, but we see a lot of developments where, during the daytime, the commercial lot down the street is packed and the residence is very empty. And then Late at night, we see the opposite. The commercial properties have very low utilization, and the residential properties have very high utilization. We're trying to help figure out a way to really bridge that gap. On my bike ride over here, I took a swing by a number of developments downtown, 101 Alma, there was a larger one on Bryant, all in kind of downtown north area. It was about 30 to 40% utilization I saw at every single one. So despite this feeling that we need more parking, that we need a new parking garage, all of these things, capacity is there, it just needs to be utilized. So I'll tell you kind of how we try to do that. As policymakers, you have a toolbox, right? There are things that you can do to try to affect these outcomes. Generally, if we want to have better utilization, we want to try to discourage on-street parking and encourage better utilization of off-street parking. I took a trip to Japan last year, and it was a fascinating experience filled with far too many times of me just photographing parking garages. But it was, oh, sorry, let me jump ahead. It was fascinating in its contrast to the Bay Area. In Japan, street parking is generally illegal in the entire country. Very different mindset about parking than California, than the United States. And the result of that is also really interesting. So this is a photo of just your typical kind of apartment building in Kyoto. And this company, Boo Boo Park, adorably named, was everywhere. And what's happened is because street parking is illegal, there is such a demand for off-street parking that in a lot of Japan, they don't have the concept of retaining private parking just for the residents. Parking is open to whoever wants to pay for it, whether that person is a resident, a contractor, a neighbor, someone visiting an office down the street. It's very open, and it's changed how the streets are built there. So I'm not sure that's the outcome we want here. I don't think it is, but it's certainly an interesting, extreme example of how really strongly discouraging street parking has resulted in very different off-street parking behavior. So I wanted to kind of think about how this could be applied here. I know in Palo Alto and in most of California, United States, we do not want, random people coming and parking, within our garage with elevator access to our buildings, stairwell access. So that's one of the main things that has prevented a lot of this better utilization. A place like the Mark or any of these buildings builds their parking lot, assigns their parking to residents, and there it remains. It is that residence parking, and nothing else is generally going to happen to that parking during the day, at night, what have you. So that's one of the reasons that we have these overflow problems, is because all of this parking has been assigned out and nothing happens to it otherwise. So we're introducing a new concept here. So what we want to do, we recognize that most buildings don't want random people coming and parking. That could be a policy that is pursued, that could be something a building could bring up, but we know that in general, most buildings have security concerns and valid ones and want to limit parking to people they're comfortable with. So we're building a new technology that actually allows buildings to do exactly that. It allows them to curate a custom list of who is allowed to park on site and let those people share underutilized parking. So if you're a resident living at the Mark, you go to work from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., you would be able to rent your parking space out to someone the building trusts. It may not be a random member of the public, but it may be someone that works at the Mark, or it may be a contractor, it may be your neighbor's nanny. But the idea is, if the building is comfortable with that person, that we want them to be able to utilize that underutilized parking spot and not park on the street. So how big that kind of network is, how widely the building wants to cast that net, totally up to them. We've talked to some buildings that are really only comfortable with residents themselves, don't even want, nannies asking for parking. They want residents to do everything, and they want it to do on someone else's behalf if needed. Other buildings have, kind of a wider, they're more open to this. Maybe they don't. It's the kind of building that doesn't have a gate on their garage, so they're already kind of having people walking around. They could allow guests to book directly. And in kind of a more, and this is a kind of new use case, but in an even more welcoming use case, we're starting to have some conversations with buildings that have employees either in the building, it might be a mixed use building, or they have employees that work down the street or nearby, or perhaps an employer that the building owner has a relationship with, and they want to open that parking up to those employees. That would be something that they could do as well. And so here's kind of an example scenario is, 845 Ramona Street is a residence, and they could partner with Downtown Palo Alto KinderCare as well as the Palo Alto History Museum and allow those employees, and again, just those employees, at least for now, to park in their building. They'd have to figure out access. There's a lot of kind of questions around that that we work through. Some of these buildings don't have access issues. Again, some don't have gates at all. But for those that do, we work with them to make sure that those other companies would get garage door openers or what have you to kind of work through those issues. And there's a lot of good that can come from this. First and foremost is cheaper housing. We, I'm sure as you guys know, have a housing crisis here. There are many ways to tackle that. One is making more money off the unit that you rent or that you own. So if you're living in a condo in downtown Palo Alto and your mortgage or your HOA is just getting too expensive, being able to make another couple $100s a month from renting your parking space out to people that your building trusts is a way for you to be able to stay in that unit longer. And so we're excited about being able to help people make a little bit more money from the housing they pay for today. We've also heard from a lot of people that they like the community aspect of this. People have told us they're meeting people that even people within the same building, that they never knew their name, they kind of knew their face, but finally they can connect the dots. And when they're in the elevator together, they say, hey Joe, thanks for that parking space last week. And we start to build bonds. And that's been really great to see. Lastly, I think the third biggest is this helps put an opportunity cost on your parking spot, right? We would like more people to be walking and biking and taking a scooter, what have you. But it's hard when that car is sitting in your parking spot and there's not really a reason to get rid of it, right? You've paid off the car, your parking spot is bundled with your apartment, why not keep it? Well, if you can start to make a couple $100s a month from that spot, and the more it's empty, the more you make, that puts a bit of an opportunity cost on keeping that car. And that's a way to encourage these residents to start ditching their automobiles. So that's been a great win as well. Lastly, and I'm coming to the end, another thing that's great about this is kind of unifying all types of parking. So there are all kinds of different slices of parking that residential buildings have. They may have dedicated guest parking, they may have assigned parking to residents, they may have staff parking that goes unused at night because they just don't really know what to do with it. They may have, or they do have, parking tied to vacant units, right? When a rental unit as someone moves out, there's typically a span of weeks or months. Actually, the unit below me right now is sitting empty and the parking space is sitting empty right in downtown Menlo Park. That's a wasted opportunity for someone else that could be parking off street. So this is a mobile app that allows you to book all of these types of parking. And we're getting into EV parking as well, which is an interesting use case. Something we're talking to the market about of there are increasing numbers of Tesla owners in buildings that actually don't have chargers in their own spots. So our app becomes a way for people to share, could be 6 electric vehicles and 2 chargers in the same building, and try to hopefully ensure some fairness, also maybe cover the costs of the electricity, that kind of thing. And that's it. Hopefully, I think I made it through pretty fast.
Okay, thank you. I have like 1,000 things that
you're going to have to keep it to a few.
But what I'd like to do is, if anybody wants to light up to be first, that would be great. No takers? All right, I'll throw a question out there. We hear a lot about this concept, or I've heard a lot about this concept of sort of decoupling parking. What is, from your perspective, does that help or hurt the path towards looking at parking differently?
Yeah, generally it's going to be, if your goal is better utilization of parking, the more you can put an opportunity cost on that spot, the better it's going to be utilized. So today we see, a lot of my own apartment, it's a bundled parking spot. I don't pay separately for it. And if I had to pay $100, $150 a month, I might reconsider that and decide to ditch my automobile and do something different. So decoupling that decision of renting that apartment or buying that condo from, do I want to actually store a vehicle in this spot month after month, is really helpful and important when it comes to better utilization of parking. And that gives the landlord the ability to really maximize usage, right? As if you take certainly even one of these buildings that's been around for 30 years and they start doing that, that could put, say you have a building that has 100 parking spots and all of a sudden they start unbundling and charging $100 a month. The building itself may get, 10, 15 parking spots back under their control, and they can then do things with that, right? They could decide, let's, use this app and give spots to the building next door. Let's have our staff park on site rather than on the street, those kind of things. So I think generally it's a good thing.
So I'll just, while I wait for someone to light up, it's interesting because I think we have, as commissioners, we have to sort of look at that idea of unbundling parking, but also we have to recognize that if you, for example, this is anecdotal, which I don't love to rely on, but I think there are tenants in our downtown, for example, whose parking is unbundled and charged at a separate rate. And for them, they forgo the interior parking and use, the street instead because there's no cost associated with it. So I think, as we start to look, as communities like ours start to look at those ideas, we have to understand the framework. So I think the idea of unbundling parking, which sort of lends itself to better utilization, there's a city component to that. The city also has to create a incentive for people not to go, okay, well, I'm not paying $150 for the spot downstairs. I'll just park across the street in front of my neighbor's house.
And one of the things I'd reiterate too is, you look at this parking data, and it's been, for many of these buildings, it's been decades since they were built. And you have the ability, as planning commissioners, to set guidelines or set rules that can really encourage or even force, buildings or developers to make sure that they're maximizing usage of their parking lot after it's built. And one thing I want to instill is, the job of your toolkit doesn't end when the building is built. Right? If you can add stipulations, if you can make sure that you are doing your best to get that new building to maximize usage of its parking after it's built, that's a really good thing. Whether that's requiring unbundling, encouraging them to use some kind of technology like this, or I believe part of the changes the council made last year were allowing residential buildings and commercial buildings to share parking requirements, things like that. There are ways that you can better utilize parking far after the building's built. Because the worst, I shouldn't say the worst, but a bad outcome is, 30 years later, the building, even at peak demand, the peak demand point of the week, the building has 40% of their parking spots empty.
Commissioner Walfogel.
Great, thank you. Just look at my notes here. So thanks for coming tonight. I actually appreciate your coming to us early with a platform idea, since cities sometimes have trouble keeping track with what's going on, and platforms get ahead of policy. So I think this gives us a chance to think about policy implications. And I generally agree with your tenet of discouraging on-street parking. So I think that's a good goal. I'm not 100% sure that your platform leads in that direction. I can give you some counterexamples, but it's an intriguing goal. I'm also, I believe somebody did an app-based residential park sharing application a couple years ago that failed, and it sounds like you're aiming more at multifamily than at single family. And I don't really remember the details of why that platform failed. But again, I think in the big picture, going after multifamily buildings, may be a better place to go. Again, I mean, I think this is a policy question that, we, City Council, other people need to take up. And in that framework, and this may slightly be a question for staff, but if a parking space is required, does the landlord have, so let me just walk through a couple scenarios. Does the landlord have the discretion to rent that out to some secondary use for some part of the day? Is that something that would be legally permissible, or does it need a new framework? Or, I mean, is that something we have to take up as a policy question?
Yeah, I think this is certainly introducing us into some new sort of ways. Yeah, no, but I mean, we have standards for shared parking and how we do that. And so our code, the way it's set up, and again, it's been, I don't know if the parking standard has been updated in any recent timeframe other than our recent changes to reducing the number of parking spaces. But our code, I think, is pretty clear that when you have required parking to serve a use or a building, that it's intended to be used by that user or that building, unless there's extra parking or if there was some previously approved shared parking agreement.
Okay, so that's an area that we would potentially have to take up.
Some policy.
Yeah, some policy things. And then what about the flip side of that? What about if a space is assigned to a tenant? Would this just be a matter between a lease matter on whether the tenant has the right to sublease that space or not, or would there be any policy question attached to that?
Yeah, that one I'd probably want to check in with our legal counsel a bit more to understand about the city's role, if any, in sort of that situation.
Yeah, okay, so it just sounds like these are areas where there may be policy intersections, so I appreciate your coming and raising some of these points to us early. Yeah, and I think there's a whole bunch of other follow-up questions to that, but I think they're more contractual than legal and policy, so I'll table those.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'd add on that is, if a developer is here and you're talking over parking numbers, a question I would encourage you guys to ask is, what will you be doing to make sure this parking that you're going to build is actually, utilized as much as possible? I think that would be a helpful question to ask.
Let's say, it's a fair question. There's actually a hazard. I mean, something else that I think we would want to do if these things were to happen is to set up a registry so we know what's happening and how frequently it's happening. Because one thing that would be good to understand is if unbundled parking led to rent increases, if landlords said to tenants, hey, you can participate in these platforms, you're going to generate $400 a month of revenue, I want $200 of that. I think we should at least be aware of those kind of policy implications, or if this is pushing tenants to say, hey, I've got an RPP permit, I'm just going to rent out my space and go park on the street. I think we'd want to understand those kind of policy implications. These are just things that we'd want to be tracking. So, I mean, I think if these kind of platforms were to emerge, I think that I suspect we would want some kind of registry, some kind of information sharing, but I don't know what that would look like.
I think there's crossover too, this idea of, shared utilization. I was just reading an article about RVs using new space, I think in East Palo Alto, and I thought about broadly the discussion that's coming, that will continue to come before us about Cubberley, and I thought, when we see that discussion, is that an opportunity for us as a planning commission or a community or a planning department or a transportation department to talk about, should Cubberley be designed in a way that it could host overnight RV parking for those members of our community that are in RVs and are on the street, if, for example, we wanted to provide them with a safer place. So I think these ideas of maybe it's built for one purpose, but it's used for multiple purposes and members of our community is something we can start to think of broadly. Okay, I have a light from Commissioner Sima. And by the way, the questions don't have to be directed at Evan. They can be directed at Jonathan or anybody, really. These are very broad.
So thank you very much for coming here tonight. And, these kinds of parking solutions are obviously things that we want to think about and contemplate. I'm not sure if you're coming this evening. I'm a little confused. And I didn't know what the specific topic was going to be, the way it was agendized. If you are encouraging the use of your app, your company's app, or if you're encouraging policies that would make it easier to use your app. So that's a little up in the air for me. I think a lot of, there's places in the city where we don't want to encourage people to park on the street because they are heavily impacted and where we have RPP already. We also have a policy currently that I think is pretty important, that we have on-site parking for residential uses, and that's a safety and convenience policy. And when you think about, people coming home late at night or people with several young children and bags of groceries, they want to be as close to their front door as possible. So, like my colleagues, it's intriguing to think about how we can make these things work. I'm not sure I quite agree with your interpretation of our recent Fair and Peers study. I think it didn't show those kinds of surpluses. And I anecdotally did not notice those surpluses. And I went out at the peak and looked at all the buildings except one I couldn't get into at like 2 and 3 in the morning. So I didn't really notice that. So, and then it seems like a legal issue. And incidentally, I think this is going on already. I mean, I have no objection. If somebody has an extra parking spot, especially in a garage, I have, as long as they're following the other laws in any residential neighborhood, I assume this happens informally, just like people rent out rooms informally.
Yeah, very much.
Already. And so I assume what you would like your app to do is do it on a much larger scale. And I think for anyone who has a secure parking spot, regardless of whether it's a renter or a homeowner, I think that's different than encouraging a multifamily property owner or manager where there was shared parking on a sign to all of a sudden sell it out from under people. And I don't know how it seems very complicated to maintain that relationship when the needs of different tenants will be very different. So anecdotally, just last night, I toured one of our, for something else, with one of our subsidized housing projects, and it's family. It's 1, 2, and 3 bedroom, but more family. And just last night, the manager, since this particular site opened, said they're in an RPP district and they really like it, the tenants, because she said, when the kids get to be teenagers and they get cars, then they don't have enough parking spots in what they are currently assigned. So I think anything we can do to expedite and optimize use of parking spots where it doesn't hurt residents or reduce their ability to enjoy life in the region the way everybody does, and not using a car to commute or on a daily basis is easy for some, but very difficult for others. So those are my initial thoughts, and thank you very much for coming out tonight.
Okay, Commissioner Lally, anything?
Yeah, I had one quick question that is related to what Commissioner Waldfogel asked. I think I get your business plan, although not the numbers, that's up to you. But I'm not quite sure about the intersections with the city. So my question is, what can people do now? I mean, if it's true that the Mark has got plenty of extra space and they decide to lease these things out on, market days, can they do that right now, or is that constrained, Jonathan?
Well, I think that this kind of ties into the second question that
Yeah,
Commissioner
it does.
Waldfogel had asked, and I think my response to that was I'd want to consult with our legal counsel to understand that in any kind of detail. It sounds like there's a relationship between the tenant of the building or the tenants in the building and whatever the third party form is. So I don't have an answer for you on that, but it's a curious question and one that it sort of reflects the fact that these things change quickly and our codes don't, and the policy discussion supporting that change in code also is an area that lags behind sometimes.
Yeah, there's nothing sort of remarkable about the problem definition, which is that various places at various times of day or night, there is unused parking. No question about that. It's just the interface and what hoops we'd have to go through to even at least test market some of this stuff. So I take your answer, just kind of confer with legal on that. That's all.
I think one of the interesting things that we can think about is even if we don't reduce parking standards, let's say, and we continue to maintain our parking standards, do we alleviate other problems by still creating policies that encourage property owners to still better utilize it? There's some. It's an interesting idea. Even if we don't buy into the reduction, we go, look, you're right next to this office building, and they don't have any parking. Maybe there's a cost benefit analysis. We can say, well, if you partner with this office building that's tremendously underparked, the planning department can provide you with some other benefit. I don't know. It's interesting, and not necessarily Shoop or whatever this parking app is called, because this really isn't an endorsement really of your business, but just the idea that there may be solutions out there that we can start to think about that could solve problems that are out there. Okay, I have a light from Commissioner Rupert.
Thank you for coming out here today. I really appreciate learning all about how this works. I think it's a really interesting idea. I had a question. What do you do with secured buildings? How does that work? Does the landlord then just give extra parking or garage door opener?
It depends. So things are very different if there's a gate and not a gate. If there is a gate, and honestly most of the buildings we're working with to start have a gate, the app is really being used for friends, family, contractors that are coming to visit someone that lives there. So if I'm, I live in a building in downtown Palo Alto, and my contractor is coming from 10 to, God knows when, and they need a place to park, I would use the app to see if one of my neighbors has a spot they can use. And I would go, I'm going to be home, letting them in, helping them, show them where my unit is. So I'm going to go open the garage for them and show them where to park. That's kind of our initial use case.
And my only comment, not to be a Debbie Downer on this, but it's more of like, how would this work from a liability standpoint? Because if you're now allowing somebody else to come and park, that to a degree makes you responsible for their actions, I would think, on the property, and expands insurance liabilities. I'm not sure this is settled under the law, but it's just something to think about in terms of liability.
Yeah, I would say, it's...
That's all.
Yeah, you could easily text your neighbor, ask the same question, get a yes, park them in their spot, and still have the same questions. And the state of California has a lot of requirements around minimum liabilities and insurance and all of those kind of things. So were there an incident to happen, everybody should be covered. The building also, I forget what exactly the requirements are, but most buildings also have to carry liability policies. So the parties involved should already be covered, and we're just trying to make something that may happen today with a lot of difficulty a lot easier. In the same way of, 10 years ago, you may have gotten to the airport by texting a friend. Now you open your Lyft or Uber app and go that way. There are certainly liability issues there when accidents happen, and we've kind of sorted them out over time, but it's a thing that kind of used to happen under the radar and now happens in a much easier way.
Okay. All right, I don't see any other lights. I just want to thank you for coming. I think one of the things that we should continue to do as a team here, as a commission, is information share. And I think if now that we've sort of done one of these study sessions, there are lots of areas. Just listening to you talk, I was thinking about the parking lifts and how many times we hear about whether or not those are working or not working. And if I knew how to get a hold of a parking lift operator who would be willing to come here and tell us more about it and sort of defend against some of the ideas, I think that would be a good session too for us. But I want to thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I know Chair Riggs would have liked to have been here, and I'm sure he would have appreciated the conversation too. And thank you for sharing with us sort of a little glimpse into something that you're doing to solve parking. And And I want to encourage any of you who have a contact or an idea for a study session to reach out to Billy, to Commissioner Riggs, excuse me, to Chair Riggs, and let him know, because I think he's interested in having one of these, every month or every couple months. Okay.
Great.
I'll let
Thank
you
you,
go. Good
Commissioners.
luck with your
Appreciate the
commission meeting
opportunity.
tonight.
Thank you for
and
coming
thanks again for
out.
coming. Okay. Let's move swiftly on to our action item, which is to review and potentially make a recommendation to the Finance Committee and to the City Council on this immense budget. For those who haven't participated in this process before, one of the things our staff does is they sort of outline the items that are different from last year, under the assumption that we wouldn't necessarily spend as much time on items from last year. But really, any item in this budget is, if you have questions about it or comments, please feel free to sort of raise them. And staff has a report, so we'll let them start. Ms. Moitra, would you kick us off?
Yeah, so Chitra Moitra is our planner with our department, and she'll give the presentation. And I'll just caution the commission before you get excited that there's a lot of members of the public in the audience. There are public folks out there, but they're also city employees.
Actually, do we have any speaker cards?
I don't think we do, except for Mary. Mary, do you want to speak on the issue? You sure?
Okay, all right. So they're here for questions?
You can reserve the right, okay? Okay.
Director Wright, just to be clear, they're here to answer questions on?
Yes, that's correct.
And are they specific to the 13 new items?
I think it's any question that you could possibly
Got it.
ask about the
All right,
CIP
well, there
could
you go,
probably be
everybody.
answered this evening.
Take us away, please.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Chitra Moitra, Planner, Long Range Planning Section. Tonight, staff requests the Planning and Transportation Commission to review the 13 new capital improvement projects for consistency with the comprehensive plan and forward the findings to the Finance Committee and the City Council. So every year, the city departments identifies new CIPs based on city's infrastructure needs and City Council's priorities. This year, we have 13 such new CIPs, which are included in the capital budget book. These new ones reviewed by the Commission every year, and Section 19.04.040 of the Palo Alto Municipal Code describes PTC's role in reviewing this new CIPs. First, PTC should review these CIPs for comprehensive plan consistency. They can comment on individual projects. They can suggest improvements to increase efficiency in the process. And thirdly, they can also identify new projects which seems to be missing from this year's list to be included in the following year. So this year, we have followed the same pattern of analysis which we do for previous year's CIPs. We link each new CIP with a comprehensive plan element with a goal, a policy, and if a program is applicable. We also add to the new CIPs the boards and commission reviews which are required, and if any environmental review is required. So this year we have 210 capital improvement projects in the CIP book, of which I already said 13 is new. So like previous years, we will be focusing our analysis only on the new CIPs. And the rest, 197 remainder CIPs have already been reviewed by the PTC years before. So the next slide shows that the most important commonly quoted element, which is the safety element. 6 of the CIPs are aligned with that, and followed by the natural environment element and the land use element. The next slide shows, for the slide before, in the safety element, goal S2, which is on natural hazards and fire mitigation. That's the most commonly quoted goal. For the next slide, this one, we have summarized the CIP budget how much of the budget is invested by element. So as we can see, more than half, 52% of the 2020 capital budget is invested in projects which align with the natural environment element. So here are some pictures of some of the, important CIPs of this year. As you can see, that all the CIPs are in compliance with the Comprehensive Plan 2030, and staff requests that the commission finds this and approves the findings to the Finance Committee and the City Council. So this concludes my staff presentation, and I think we have staff here from every department ready to answer your question.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Murtra, and thank you all for coming. We'll try to have one question for every single. Okay, let's use the lights, everyone. I have Commissioner Lowing. Why don't you kick us off?
Is this strictly for questions, or can we?
You can make a comment, a
I was
question.
going to suggest we just get.
I'll just say real quickly for clarification. At one point, if we wish to make a recommendation, we'll need a motion.
I was going to suggest that we start with the motion, just so that's what we're discussing. So I would move to recommend to Finance Committee and City Council that the proposed 20 to 24 capital improvement projects are consistent with the Comprehensive Plan 2030.
Do I have a second?
Okay,
Commissioner Walfogel, seconds. There's a motion on the floor. Would you like to speak now?
Just speak. We have seen a lot of these before in prior years. Thanks again to staff and city managers out there to kind of go through it for us in advance. Glad that the emphasis is on taking care of our citizens and excuse me, in fire and health and police and all that. That's a very solid priority. There's also, there's also reasonable pushing out as priorities change, and that's kind of sad, but it's also just good management. Priorities change, things have to be coordinated to be cheaper 2 years from now because something else is changing that makes sense. So again, a salute to all the managers that make those accommodations. When I was on parks, I was on a subcommittee for CIPs for many years, and it's very hard. And to come up with a document like this, even on the new ones, is just great work. I went through all of the ones from parks. I see Darren's here tonight. Also, thank you. Made some adjustments, pushed some things out that we pushed out 5 years ago, and we're still pushing out. But again, that's what has to be done to make this thing all work. So I congratulate him on that. I just had one detailed question, and that's when you phase in. I presume you phase in the vehicle and equipment replacement over 5 years. Whoever's in charge of that one. Do you have a budget by year, and it phases in?
Vehicle replacement? Scott, vehicle replacement?
Do you do like 20% 1 year, 20% the next year, which is what I presume?
Is this one on? No. Paul Harper with the Office of Management and Budget. So the vehicle replacement program, essentially there is a replacement schedule for all of the vehicles, and so when they come up in terms of their end of life based on usually mileage, they're programmed in for that year to be replaced, and so there's basically a cohort of vehicles every year that gets added in, and then once we get to that year, usually the year prior to the replacement, it's really kind of drilled into to make sure that those vehicles are still the ones that need to be replaced, and they adjust it based on, maybe this one doesn't need to be replaced because it has some life left, and they'll move stuff up and move stuff out.
Good. More good judgment. Like it. Thank you.
Actually, I have a quick question. Are those vehicles sold, or what do you do with our, actually, that would apply to the defibrillators and the cardiac monitors and the thermal imaging and the jaws of life. Do you guys, if they are at the end of their useful life, do they go to communities that maybe can't afford those things? What do you guys do with all the old equipment?
I'll let the fire chief speak to the fire equipment. The vehicles themselves, I believe if they have some useful life left, we try to sell them, particularly fire vehicles. We've sold them to Oaxaca, and I think it's done through a donation. The police vehicles, I'm not sure if we sell them or they get salvaged. I think we get some salvage price back on them, and so that's used to offset some of the costs of replacing the new vehicles.
From the manufacturer. Okay, thank you.
Did you want the fire chief to speak about the
Not necessarily, I can ask him offline. Okay, are there any other comments or commissioners that'd like to mention something before we take a vote on this? Asher, do you want to speak to your second before we vote?
I just want to thank staff for a very thorough analysis. I actually have one question for you. This pie chart, is this percentage relative to all CIPs or to new this year? All CIPs. Okay, so that's interesting that 52% of all CIPs are in the natural environment category. That surprises me a little bit, but that's good news.
Okay, comment from Commissioner Suma?
Thank you. I just wanted to thank staff. This is like a weighty tome, and I just think it represents so much work across so many departments. And just for our huge TV viewing audience, this is the capital improvement budget. So, and I did look at it I looked at the whole thing, and it's just an impressive piece of work.
Okay, I don't see any more lights. Before we take a vote, let me just double check. Anybody else want to make any comments?
I had a question.
Okay.
It's not,
Commissioner Rupabar?
yeah, it's just a process question for you. Thank you for the presentation. Since I'm new this year, I kind of want to understand how it works from a process perspective. So these 197 that were outstanding from the prior years, do we not get to them, or what, they roll over, or how does that work?
So these are continuing CIPs, meaning that these CIPs has been either, introduced 3-4 years before. So every year the new CIPs are reviewed by the PTC. So, these have already been reviewed before. So these are continuing CIPs.
Okay, but they're going to get done, the old ones this year?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Not
In 5 years.
necessarily this year. So this.
Oh, they have 5 years to get
Yes.
done.
So they have 5 years to get done.
Okay, I just want to make sure I know for my own understanding how these works. Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor of supporting the motion on the floor, please raise your hand. Okay, that's a unanimous support for the motion on the floor with one absent. And that concludes our discussion on this item. Thank you all for attending. If any of you need a copy of the CIP, we have 6 up here probably. All right, well, we will leave the copies with any unused copies that you don't want to take home, you can leave with Director Late. He will make sure to recycle them. Yeah, so before we go to the minutes, let me just ask, I actually haven't had a chance to read this, but Commissioner Templeton just asked me an interesting question, which is, if we want to have a discussion about, you sort of suggested that we may want to review this and have a discussion on I guess, our purview or involvement or
Yeah, so
When would you
maybe
anticipate us?
short of a discussion, but maybe some comments at the end of the agenda under commissioner questions, comments, announcements. and
Would you
future
suggest we do that at the next meeting, or you want to do that
agenda.
now?
Okay, just a few words we'll spend on it, yeah. You'll see,
Do you have some comment? Okay, great. All right.
It'll be clearer
Then
when we
we
get
will do that right after we review the minutes. Thank you for clarifying. Okay. Unless someone has something in particular about one of the two meetings, I would accept a motion for approval of the minutes for both meetings.
I'll make that motion.
Second?
Okay, so I have a motion from Commissioner Suma and a second from Commissioner Lowing to approve the meeting minutes from our March 27th and our April 10th meetings from this year. All those in favor, please raise your hand. That's a unanimous vote for that approval with one absent. Okay, and moving on. We don't have any committee items, but we're going to use this minute for the commissioner questions and comments to talk about the Transportation and Traffic RPP program evaluation report that's given to us. So I have a light from Commissioner Suma. Anybody else would like to talk about it, just light me up, please. Thank you. Commissioner Suma.
So I also wanted to mention first that I know not everyone can come to the Mayfet Parade, but I did participate on our behalf and waved at the children and whatnot, missed you all. But I know it's not a time everyone can attend.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. It's really super fun to do. If you can do it next year, I would encourage you. It's really just heartwarming and fun. And then I don't know if you all want to take a look at this. I read it a little bit, but I knew this was kind of coming, and it's coming next Monday to council. So, but if you look at page 4, I guess I must have watched a meeting where so I knew this was coming up, a council meeting. So,
You mean the beginning, page 4? Okay.
yeah. The staff and consultant recommended participation in the fourth paragraph, this participation from either the Planning and Transportation Commission or an independent group. And I think it's logical that it would be the Planning and Transportation Commission that would participate this way. So I don't know if you guys want to take a second to read it, but I'm not making a motion because we don't do that at this point, but just,
I would support that. I'd like to know what we can do by Monday.
yeah.
So I think that, if I may, Chair, this is, I don't expect anybody to have digested this. It was just placed on your packet. And the purpose of this is just to bring awareness to the commission. I know that from our past conversations that this commission has longed for more involvement in the transportation and parking discussions that last year, I think there was one, maybe 2 items that were presented to the commission. And we had talked with other folks previously. Rob DeGose came and made a presentation and talked about how we're reorganizing our program. We're creating the Office of Transportation, and we're commissioning this consultant report to help us understand what our priorities are going to be. And so we're marching down this path, and we have this consultant's report now with some 30 some odd recommendations on how to address the residential parking program. And one of the comments that Commissioner Suma was just referencing is there's going to be this interest in wanting to get some input from the community about how to, on some of these recommendations. And I would suspect that the City Council would give some clear sort of guidance and direction on how to implement some of these recommendations. And then the question is, what's the forum for which the community can have that dialogue? And so what's presented on page 4 of the staff report is, from the MRG report, is that it be either the Planning and Transportation Commission or some other committee or forum. And so that's an area where I think Commissioner Suma is referring to as perhaps this is a commission that would like to be engaged in that discussion. And if so, it may be worthwhile for you to communicate that interest to the City Council, maybe by way of a letter before the council meeting.
On Monday.
Between now and Monday to
Okay.
just, yeah.
Yeah, I'll shoot an email to Commissioner Riggs and sort of pass on that message. I think it would be, it wouldn't be a bad idea if you did the same. If you guys go to page 26, though, of the packet, I just want to sort of highlight something which I think this is sort of where we want to be, and I think to some extent not just encouraging them to direct us to be more involved, but just to encourage them to think through all of these ideas. The idea of improving the parking management system and conducting a parking study downtown, and beginning the process for changing our current RPP, and then you can see number 4, adding a parking manager to the Office of Transportation. I mean, I think these are things that we've, as a commission, have realized are good ideas, and if you keep going down the list, I think this is a long list that staff has put together, I guess in consultation with your consultant, but you're endorsing these. Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I think it might be interesting I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you have an opportunity to review these items and you feel strongly about them, don't feel that we have to speak as a commission in unison between now and Monday. I think personal emails to the council members that you have relationships with, expressing them which one of these items is in your mind a priority based on your experience on the commission, is extremely valuable. And so in the absence of us having really time to review this as a whole, I almost think that's maybe even a better idea than having just Commissioner Riggs or somebody sort of speak on behalf of the commission.
Can I ask just procedurally what the action item is, or the study session item at council? No, at council. Well, how's it agendized at council?
Oh, it's an action item at council.
Action item to approve the RPP recommendations?
Well, so the recommendation is on the first page.
Okay, sorry.
Yep.
These at-place things don't work that well, but,
One of them is to approve the RPP program.
yeah, okay, got it.
And then the others are to
Okay.
maybe
So-
pursue other options.
Okay.
So, Vice Chair, I think, I mean, I didn't get a long time to read this, but I think what I was referring to was a process that will move forward, engaging the community, that suggested maybe the Planning and Transportation Commission would have a role in that. So I'm not recommending a letter, certainly between now and Monday, opining on the merit of the report, just that we think that we are the appropriate body to be engaged, and that we would like to. And ideally, if that would come from the chair or you, if,
Okay, I'll
if the
pass.
chair's out of town.
Yeah, no, well,
Is
I will-
everybody in agreement with that general?
Well, yeah, and so as a priority, that seems to make more sense than all of us flooding council members with opinions on each of the merits of these things. I think what we're just trying to set up is that we'd like to be involved as this thing plays out.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't imagine, let's just take number 2, for example, the parking operational study. If the council determines that they'd like to do an operational study of our downtown parking, I would assume that at some point, once that study is complete, it would probably make its way through our commission. I don't know that I would assume that somehow they're in the, I will pass the message on, but I do think that we should communicate to them that we are excited and interested in being involved in a capacity that is meaningful. But I just wanted, I'm not suggesting that we all go out and lobby them, but there may be things here that in our past meetings you have been like, God, we really need more staff on parking, for example. In my opinion, we definitely need a parking czar. And so if there's anything in here, and you absolutely don't have to.
But I think all those items that the MRG report is asking for recommendation on will be done through a community process and a council process, and they're asking, I think I'm right, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't have enough familiarity with this.
So they want to know, how do you want to do this, Do you want, we think maybe you should involve the Planning and Transportation Commission. So I don't,
You
the
mean in
council-
reviewing all the recommendations from the consultant?
Yeah, a community
Got it.
process. They're not going to, I don't believe they're going to consider all those many recommendations. I think they're going to consider a process to do it, and then they're going to look at our recommendations specifically about green acres and that sort of stuff. So am I interpreting that correctly, Director? Late.
I'm not sure what the exact number is, but I think that it's clear that the objective of this, I think, is simply to, what I'm hearing from the commissioner, from Commissioner Suma, and gauging by the nods on the commission, that there seems to be an interest that the Planning and Transportation Commission have a role in reviewing any direction that the council provides with respect to receiving community input on any number of the priorities that they choose to advance from the report. We don't know what numbers or which ones will get traction, but I think the question is, a question that's being presented, I guess, in this report is it an independent body or is it the Planning and Transportation Commission? I think it's to that specific point that this conversation is taking place.
Okay, let me actually do something slightly different. Why don't we do this?
And we're not agendized for a discussion on it.
Yeah, no,
I
actually,
don't want to continue a dialogue about it.
See how you feel about this suggestion. Our representatives are Ed and backup, or excuse me, Commissioner Lowing, and backup is Commissioner Rupabar for May. I'm comfortable, if you're comfortable, and if Director Late is comfortable, in either encouraging Commissioner Late when he presents on Monday night to pass the message that we would love to be involved and there's interest.
So I think what I'm hearing, and I could speak to Commissioner Riggs, Chair
Or
Riggs.
maybe he can.
I think we're spending more time on this than we actually need to.
Okay.
I think the message has been
I'm
delivered.
trying to deformalize it.
Then let's end it.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I mean, the merit of that is just simply that we don't have to write letters and figure that out, and Commissioner Riggs has to do it from Germany and all that. I could just be there as a resource because I'm the liaison anyway, so.
Yeah, I think you could communicate that to them for us. Good, okay, all right.
Since I am going to be there Monday night, I still want to know if there's a letter or not.
The reason why I'm uncomfortable with the letter idea, the reason why I'm sort of pushing back is because I imagine that there would want to be sort of group review of it, and I don't know what it would say yet, because I haven't even really read that report.
Okay.
And I don't want to speak on behalf of Chair Riggs if he had some opinion. So my preference really is, I think the sentiment here is that we want to be involved. I think that will be communicated, and I just don't think we have enough time for a letter, so I'd rather not encourage anybody to write a letter. That's okay. Okay, I have interest from Commissioner Templeton and maybe others to talk about our future agenda at all. Do you want to, is there a specific question, or you just want a little bit more ahead?
I just wondered if we're going to have agenda items or if that meeting will be canceled.
This is the May 29th in particular, or, yeah, okay.
So yeah, our agendas continue to be a little bit light. There's been a question that I'm still trying to answer about the summer and our schedule for the summer and whether or not there might be some dates that we can cancel to accommodate vacations or schedules that people may have. In the past, I think this commission has taken July off from time to time. I don't think we did it last year, but it has happened a few times. Not that it needs to be that way. But let me look for May. Yeah, so these things, and I appreciate that it's a little bit frustrating. We have, we plan for items and we work toward that, and then things shift either because other things come up or an applicant needs to, revise some plans or something like that. So at the moment, we do not have anything scheduled for May 29. So that is an open day where we can consider canceling that. We are tentatively scheduling a public meeting on the Castellea EIR. This will be just the EIR, not the project. That's tentatively scheduled for June 12. And that's contingent on us getting the draft environmental impact report out on May 17th, where we would give the commission a copy of that and about 3+ weeks to review that document. One thing that I was considering also was, and I could, Yolanda can help me sort of poll the commission offline to see if there's interest in moving the last meeting that you have scheduled for Planning Commission in June up 1 week. And the idea there would be just to, mostly for us, to accommodate some scheduling considerations that we have. But I know it's kind of late, and we've had previous conversations about not wanting to move meeting dates around, so I'm sensitive to that. But if it also works for the commission in terms of your own schedules and what you have planned for the summer, maybe that's a place where we can have a conversation about that. We don't have to talk about it tonight, but I can send a follow-up email.
Yeah, Commissioner Lang?
Yeah, I'm going to bring up again, with complete respect, with your staffing needs, your staffing vacancies, but are we making some progress on the housing work plan? You know, the second part of that was council mandated for this year, and we're down to about 6 months left in the year. And I know you said happily at the end of last year, something around the Palmer fix was underway. Could we at least get the Palmer fix and the BMR stuff this year?
That's our intent. We're under contract now with a consultant who's helping us with that. We actually started working on it last year,
Right.
But with the changes to the housing ordinance that just became effective here on May 2nd, we've had to rerun our numbers on our prototypes to find out the percentages, because we're evaluating what is the appropriate inclusionary requirement, because right now it's 15%. Does it go up to 20%? Is there some other metric or high, standard that we want to use? So we're still looking at that, and it's our goal to have it done this year to the Planning Commission and hopefully to City Council. So that's one that we're working on. We do have these other resource constraints. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get through all of the things that have been listed.
Understandable.
Yeah.
It's just that, the housing crisis is a crisis, and BMR housing crisis is a crisis within the crisis.
Yeah, we're working on that one because obviously it's got some significant movement in that piece too.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you. And I'll just add, look, I am present for the dates in July, the standard commissioner dates, but just sort of we demonstrated tonight that we can be we can create an opportunity to sort of learn with each other and and maybe with the community and staff. So again, if any of you have an interest in having a discussion about a specific topic, we can use our dates to do that. And they can be shorter meetings, but they can still be meaningful. And then last question, is anybody going to the event on Friday, the Housing the Bay event?
I think so.
Okay, all right, I will be there.
Which event?
It's called Housing the Bay. It's an event put on, I think, by the Urban Land Institute, and there's a number of great speakers. But okay, I just wanted to see who was coming. All right, does anybody have any other comments?
Is the May 29th meeting on or off or pending?
It's currently TBD until we hear more. But we're not canceling yet, or are we canceling?
No, let me check in with Chair Riggs and just go over that, but
okay.
It's
All right.
unlikely.
But we would know by when? I think that's what the question is, maybe.
Soon.
Okay, soon. Commissioner Walfogel.
Thanks. You've already answered a whole bunch of my questions, so it's fantastic. The Castellea EIR, that is an action item for the...
Not, so it's...
What is that?
Right, so there's an application on file. We are preparing an environmental impact report, and while not required under state law, we typically have a practice of presenting the draft EIR at the Planning Commission, or we could do it another means, but we've been using the Planning Commission as an opportunity for that to one, hear the commission's comments on the draft EIR, but also to create a forum where the public can come speak and articulate those comments. And we'll have our consultants here and to listen, and the idea is that we would respond in the final environmental impact report to any of the comments that have been raised regarding the document.
Great. So a suggestion for assuming that the EIR drops on the 17th, we could potentially use May 29th. If there's some format where we could have, let's say, an informal discussion among ourselves, I mean, just as a way to educate ourselves. I'm just wondering if there's some way we could do that that's not really a public comment session, but is more of a, guide us through it, figure it out, so that we're really prepped for the deeper conversation. I mean, I'm assuming this is not a 3-page document when it drops.
Yeah, maybe 4, but I think that would be difficult to have that conversation. There's a lot of interest in this project in the community, and I think just having a forum where we can have that exchange and not engage the community on that would be difficult. However, I'm happy to make myself available and our consultants available to answer any questions that individual commissioners may have, and we can have that offline in advance of the meeting if that would be helpful to sort of walk you through the document, on a one-on-one kind of basis.
Thank you. All 4 pages. Let's see, a couple other items. We talked about the RPP and relationship with council. Council has also stood up a new grade separation committee that I believe does not liaise with PTC. I mean, I'm assuming that at some point this will probably touch PTC if Churchill is closed or something like that. I think that that's a mandatory touch point. But do we, as a commission, do we have any feeling, do we want to be involved with that? Do we want to stay away from it?
Are you talking about grade separation?
Yes, because there's a new committee that's being, there's a new committee that is looking at this again. I think that has finance involved in it as well. So I just want to tee that up. It's not agendized, so we can't have a deep discussion about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I feel like everything got tabled when Governor Newsom sort of had his State of the State and
Yeah,
made a lot of changes, and so it became unclear what was what.
Yeah, and there's a lot of history here because there's also still the, the Rail Corridor Task Force report, which was, I believe, adopted as city policy 10 years ago. And so there's a lot of moving parts here.
Is the question, do we want to communicate as a group to City Council to empower us to be a part of that process?
I think that's the discussion we might want to have, whether we feel that we can contribute to that process or whether we would like to, propose that in some fashion. We're not, I don't think we can have a deep discussion about it. I wanted to raise it.
I think we continue to have questions about how we would have a discussion about having a discussion. So obviously right now wouldn't be an appropriate time for us to move something like that, but how would we?
Yeah, so let me, I'm not as connected to that process, and so I'm not going to be as helpful to you in terms of answering your questions, but what I can do is connect with the city manager and the folks that are involved in this and see, see if we can answer that question, where does the Planning and Transportation Commission plug into this? 2, is there an opportunity to at least give the commission an update as to what's going on so that you can at least be informed as to where we are and where you would plug in. And that would just be a staff person probably coming and giving that update.
And actually if we could get, I think Caltrain came in, did they brief the council on their business plan?
I think they did, like a couple weeks ago.
I mean, if we could get a copy of that, or if we
sure.
could even get a briefing on that, I mean, it's a bit of a mystery to a lot of us. The other thing is I just wanted to reflect for a second on our study session, on our parking study session.
Yeah.
I think overall it's a step forward. It's a step in a good direction. I think to perfect it, it would be helpful to get some part of the presentation in advance, at least just get a little more scope in advance. I made a lucky guess on what the scope would be, so I was somewhat prepared, but I think that just knowing a little bit more than the name of the speaker would be helpful and empowering for us.
So we can connect on this, I completely agree. I think I think in the absence of your comment as well, there's already been some discussion about how we can sort of improve this process so that, maybe even community members can have even a better heads up because they may not be as familiar with the topics as even we are.
Yeah, and I don't want to criticize that. I mean, I think it's great that we did this.
No, we're
I think
learning.
it's a great first experiment. So my two takeaways are if we can get a little more presentation in advance or just a little more agenda in advance, number one. And number two, as a reformed entrepreneur, I know there's always the temptation to be selling, but we should ask, when people do this, I think that we should just be very conscientious about not selling.
Yeah, no, that message was passed on, and I was going to make a comment that this isn't Shark Tank, and we may see holes, but we don't necessarily. The idea wasn't necessarily to have a broad discussion about this individual's or company's specific technology, but just how that technology might impact planning. I think one of the things that we've talked a little bit about it at some point. We may want to invite some developers to come in and talk about their models. And I think your feedback is very helpful. And ideally, the next time we do this, we'll be able to frame the topic more articulately in the staff report so people sort of know what they're coming to.
No, it's great, and I have some topics that
Please share them with me.
that I will feed in. So it's a good precedent, and let's make it better.
I'm really more than happy to sort of help facilitate any of these. So let us know. Okay.
I have just one
Yeah, go
add-on
ahead.
to that.
Yeah.
I think last meeting, Commissioner Suma was sort of instrumental in saying, besides just sending stuff in, could we sort of, these weren't her words, but sort of pre-process it. So if there are 3 ideas or one that the chair thinks is great, it seems to me like the meeting before, we should say, this is kind of the plan. Does that work? Is that, of interest to everybody? Here's the other 2 that we could go to. And then maybe even discuss format. We might even say, hey, that'd be sort of good to get a for and against. So if we just had time to chat about it as opposed to arriving to kind of pre-process it, I think that might be helpful. Maybe. I'm kind of stealing your thunder, Commissioner Suma, so you might want to add to that. But
I think this is good. I think this is good feedback. I can't say that I initiated this topic from the topic standpoint, but I was involved in the coordination, and I will tell you it's complicated. The scheduling of individuals who are just not involved in our sort of as staff members for our city don't really have as flexible schedule, and I think my sense is that there's some discretion here being exercised by the chair and in sort of deciding and vetting the speakers, and I think. But I can let him speak to that more. But I'll pass the message on. I would consider, based on how difficult it was to coordinate, I would consider ourselves lucky if we had 1 or 2 more of these. It is that difficult to get somebody in the room who's willing to sort of have that conversation. I think certain topics may be easier than others, but we shall see. Anyways, yeah, Commissioner Suma?
Yeah, so I don't need to beat a dead horse. I was hoping for a more collaborative approach, and I even think if the specific topic had been agendized, I probably would have called the other company I know about that's located in Palo Alto that has an app for doing this. I don't know how successful they've been, and talked to them about it. Pied Parker, I think it is. I think they're still in operation. So let's try to do a more collaborative thing on that. And then I wanted to ask the director, did you say we were going to get the draft EIR on the May 17th?
That's our objective.
Okay. And then you wanted to know, around May 17th, you wanted to know, I think you asked if we wanted to move the June 12th Castellea draft meeting up?
No.
Did you say that?
No, our plan is so if we're able to meet our mark and get the draft environmental document out on May 17th,
Okay.
then we would have that public hearing before the Planning Commission on June 12th.
Okay, Thanks.
Okay. Seeing no more lights and no more comments, this meeting on May 8th is adjourned at 7.